Hi everybody, I'm Philip Meyer, a Max certified trainer and Max for Live developer. For the past year or so, I've been making devices that use the new MIDI tools feature in Ableton Live 12, and I'm lucky to have 5 devices included as a free pack inside of Ableton Live 12.1. So today I'll be taking you through each of those 5 devices. You can think of this as a video manual of sorts. If you want to download the pack, it's free. Use the link in the description down below, and you can also get the text manual using the link in the description below. Let's dive in. So there are 3 MIDI tool generators and 2 transformers. If you're new to this MIDI tools feature, in general, it was something that Ableton introduced with Live 12. And the idea basically is that we can operate upon the MIDI clip in a sort of batch fashion. So rather than generating or transforming MIDI inside the track as it flows through the track, as with the typical MIDI effect, instead what we're doing is kind of generating or transforming a bundle of MIDI data that lives inside of a MIDI clip. So we'll start today with this device that I made called Polyrhythm, which is basically like a multi-track pattern generator that works inside of the MIDI clip. So we have here 6 tracks. Each of them has 5 parameters. The first one is the pitch, or the note that particular sequencer goes on. The second one is the length of the sequence. The third one is the density of the sequence, or the number of notes that are in it. The third one is called variance, that basically allows us to change the pattern. The 5th is the velocity, and then the final one allows us to enable or disable that particular pattern. So if I start off here just with the first one, 16 steps, we'll go up to 5 events. And then we can do the same on the second track. So we'll do a 9-step pattern here with 3 events. Actually, let's do 2. And I'm going to change the instrument. And then I'm going to use this variance, which in this case is going to kind of rotate this pattern. Just shift it. That's good. And let's do one more. We'll start at, let's do 5 and 1. And we're going to bring the velocity down on this hi-hat. So I really like to work with, particularly when I program drums, I really like to be able to have different patterns with different lengths, because I think it allows us to achieve an interesting rhythm very quickly. You can get syncopation very quickly, and you can also achieve patterns that sort of play themselves out over a very long period of time. So what we have here are, just to explain how exactly this is working. So we have a 16-step pattern with 5 events. We have a 9-step pattern with 2, which is these first 9 steps and these 2 patterns, but then the pattern restarts itself. So this is sort of step 1 of the second loop of that 9-step pattern. So we go 1 through 9, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we start back again at 1. Same up here, we have a 5-step pattern with 1 event, so we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1. So we have this kind of resetting of the phase, you could call it, of the pattern at the end of the clip. Now, if I were to make the clip longer, delete what's in here, and then generate again, you can see that now we did the same thing. It's just now that we're working with more time. And so you can sort of hear there's a kind of consistent loop, but then something different happens at the end of the clip. So you might do something like 4 bars. And then generate based on when you kind of want that phase reset to happen inside of the pattern. If you've ever used a drum machine like Electron machines that allow you to have unique pattern lengths, you'll find that this thing actually often happens where you have this kind of global reset point where all of the patterns reset back to 0. If you don't want it to work that way, there are a few other options that you have. So if we go back to just a one bar pattern, I'm going to delete what we have here and generate again. And I'm going to take this distribution and I'm going to switch it to hug. So what this does is basically we don't loop. So in the case of the 5-step pattern, we only produce the first example, the first kind of iteration of it. Same with the 9-step. The 16-step, of course, we were only ever doing one because, we have one bar in this particular case. And in this instance, the hug allows us, the variance control here allows us to basically shift where that particular pattern happens. So based on kind of how you're building your pattern, you can play around with this distribution setting to find something that you like. If you like the looping, like we had with the fill mode, but you don't want that phase reset to occur, what you can do is pick this option that's called fit, which is actually going to create a clip. It's going to lengthen the clip so that it is long enough such that that phase reset never actually happens. And this is going to go for a while, but basically when we get to the end here, we're not going to notice that change where there was a little bit of a kind of gap before we did a phase reset. It's just going to continually loop exactly with this pattern forever. The final option that we have here among these distributions, and I'm going to delete one more time and I'm going to go back to one bar again, is called stretch. So the name of this device is Polyrhythm, and this is sort of classically speaking a polyrhythmic pattern. And polyrhythm really, the meaning of it relates to the interaction between multiple patterns that are not all of the same length. So when we have 16, 9, and 5-step patterns, what we do when we have a polyrhythmic pattern is actually stretch the patterns, particularly the shorter patterns, the 9 and the 5, so that they fill the same space as the 16-step pattern. So if I increase the density of this 5-step pattern to 100%, you can see that we have 5 steps that kind of expand to fill the total amount of space. And the results that we get rhythmically will be a little bit unusual because, as you can tell, when we're using a value like 5, we're completely unquantized, right? This has no relationship to the grid that we have set here. Whereas in all of those other modes, fill, hug, and fit, which produce what we might call polymeters, the grid is kind of the basic unit of time. So you can experiment with this stretch mode if polyrhythms are something that you're interested in creating. One thing that can definitely be useful in these types of situations is to think about what is the mathematical relationship between these lengths. And I'm just going to disable the top 3 here. But if we said, 12, 9, and 6, those are all multiples of 3. And we should, as a result, get something that has a little bit more musicality to it, or at least a little bit more conventional musicality to it. At least to some extent, something to play around with. So in addition to I'm going to go back to fill here. And I'm going to go back to, let's do 2 here. And a little bit of a shift. So the way that we've been working so far when we're generating these patterns is just using the Euclidean algorithm to create patterns based on these 3 settings: length, density, and variance. And Euclidean algorithm, I'm sure you've seen sequencers that do this in the past. The reason it's so common is because it's very effective. By evenly distributing the notes across the number of steps in the pattern, we end up with patterns that have a very musical quality. And if you look at music throughout human history, you actually find Euclidean patterns turn up all the time. However, there is also another algorithm built into this device for pattern generation that works in a different way, and it's called Omni. The idea here basically is that for any combination of the pattern length and the pattern density, you can achieve any possible pattern for those two combinations. And the variance control here just allows you to basically scrub through all of those options. So taking the kick row here, I can just move this variance control and see everything. And just by kind of messing around with this, you can end up with a pattern really quickly, generate some ideas with a little bit of chance, a little bit of randomness and surprise. The kind of benefits of the Omni algorithm over the Euclidean algorithm are really that they allow you to have, one, you can have any pattern, but basically you can have patterns that don't have the sort of typical Euclidean properties, particularly this kind of even spacing of the notes within the pattern. If you're working with Euclidean, you're always going to have kind of roughly even gaps in between the notes in any given track. But if you're using the Omni mode, then you can have more kind of clustering of notes within a given area. So the most extreme example being if I put the variance over here at 0, you can see that these notes are all very close together. Particularly if I go up to 16, you could see that at the bottom, we've got them all right up next to each other. You can also, as you've seen me do, change which which pitch each track is on. And those are set relative to this bass note here, which is C1 by default because that's the default sort of bass pitch for most drum racks. But if you ever want to change that, of course, you can do that and that will shift the entire range. So, you could do interesting things like you can have kind of two kits, right? You could have a kit on every block of 16, let's say, or every block of 12 notes in the drum rack. And then you can just change which kick is getting triggered by using this note control, if that's something that's interesting to you. So let's hear a few patterns that I already made using this particular approach, like, let's say this one. And now we'll move on to the next device, which is called Retrigger. So the idea behind this device is basically it allows you to create kind of ratchets or retriggerings of notes within a MIDI clip. So this device falls into a sort of separate category of transformer. Polyrhythm is a generator because it, for the most part, is used to generate new MIDI inside of a blank clip. The transformers ingest MIDI, or sort of receive MIDI that is already living inside of the clip, and they transform it. If I go to a blank clip, you'll see that Retrigger is grayed out because there's nothing for it to transform. So what we can do with this particular device is create several sliders. And let's make, let's say 7. And each of these sliders is going to basically specify a number of times to retrigger notes. I'm going to retrigger the notes that get retriggered on a 30-second note interval. And then as I bring up these sliders, and I need to make sure I have things properly selected, you can see that some of those notes are getting retriggered. And because we have 7 sliders here, we're basically just retriggering every 7th note. Because the way that this device works is that the number of sliders, and this is true for many of my MIDI tools, the number of sliders is completely settable by you. And it will kind of just round robin through all of the notes that exist in the clip. So if I modify the second one, you can see that now it's a different bunch of notes that are getting retriggered. I'm going to select everything but the kicks because I don't want the kicks to get retriggered. And then we'll just try something like this. So one reason that I really like these MIDI tools is because I think they give us the ability to inject variation into the music that we're making. So you might have an idea that you already like, whether you played that in, or you recorded some MIDI, or you used a generator, and now you want to kind of build a composition. You want to build a full track from that idea. one thing that I think is often very difficult to do and a little bit tedious to do is to generate kind of subtle variations on an idea that you already like so that you can sequence those ideas together or those variations together and produce a completed track. Retrigger is one of those devices that allows you to do that very quickly by basically adding some decoration into your music. Now, one thing you can see here is that these retriggered notes kind of have a decaying velocity. As you can see here, this one, the kind of brightness of the color in the notes is decreasing, and there's also a ramp down here in the velocities, which I can bring up and show you a little bit more clearly. And that's controlled by this third tab here, velocity. We can increase the kind of range or the depth of that modulation, or decrease that range. So it almost sounds like a delay kind of, or an echo effect, where we have the notes sort of decaying away as they retrigger. And you can change the shape of that decay with this kind of function designer. And there's a bunch of ways to control this. And if you've used my devices in the past, you've seen these because they live in a lot of the devices. You can either click and drag directly on the viewer here, and you can see how that changes the shape. Or you can, if you want finer control, you can use these number boxes down here. If you double click, we can reset, and we can also reflect it. So now we have a rising velocity over the course of the retriggers. We can also actually reverse the retriggers so that rather than following the note that got retriggered, they actually precede it, which is quite interesting. So you can flip that back and forth. And then finally, we have another tab here, which is called time. And the idea here basically is that we can sort of shape the time interval in between each of these retriggers using another one of these functions. So if I manipulate this first number box here, you can see that we're getting this kind of exponential shape. And that's causing this like scrunching of the retrigger towards the beginning of it. Or we could go the opposite way. If we start with something that's perhaps a little bit more simple, let's find a simple clip here. In fact, let's just generate one. So we'll go to Polyrhythm. That looks fine. I'm going to use Euclidean mode here. That works. And now let's go to Retrigger again. One thing that you can do is in cases where you don't have a ton of notes, you can set the number of sliders in the Retrigger tab here to be equal to the number of notes. So if I enable the linking here, we have 9 notes. And so now you can actually control each of these retriggers independently. If you have more than 16 notes, then it's going to kind of do the best that it can. It will give you the greatest common denominator, right, of 16 and however many there are. But Link, it's trying to help you basically make it easy for you to, if you're trying to target a specific note, do that, right? So in this particular case, we have 9 notes, and I can say 1, 2, 3, 4. I want the fourth one, 1, 2, 3, 4, and oops, and I can retrigger that fourth one. Okay, that's the Retrigger device, and I'm going to play a few things for you that I created with a combination of Polyrhythm and Retrigger. One thing I like to do a lot is use follow action, so I'll kind of generate an idea, do a lot of cloning of the clip, use transformers to create different variations of that, and then just chain them together with follow actions. And on that topic of variations, we'll go one step further with another device that I have, which is called Slice Shuffler. So this is another one that's included in the pack. It's another transformer. And the idea with this one is, again, that you want to basically take something that you already have. You want to keep its essence. You want it to be recognizable as being related to something else that already happened in the music, but not exactly the same. So the idea with this particular device is that we're going to slice the MIDI clip into slices. And in this case, we're using 4 because we've set a slice interval of a quarter note and we have a 1-bar clip. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what this device allows you to do is rearrange the notes within each slice. So in the default state, we're keeping things exactly as they are originally by just playing them in the order that they were. But I can, for example, take this first clip and flip it around so that it plays backwards, basically. We're going to just rearrange all of the notes as if this particular slice we're going to play backwards. Selecting. So now that's backwards, and we can hear what that sounds like. I'm going to disable the follow action for a second on this one. And we can continue to mess with this. So for the third slice, maybe I'll shuffle this one. And then I'll perhaps clone again. So you can see here how by starting with a single idea that you really like, using a combination of the retriggers and the slice shuffles, you can get to lots of variations on an idea very quickly, and then it's much, much easier to build your track using follow actions or just by laying out the patterns in the arrangement view. The slice shuffler here has 6 modes. So forward is the default, which is basically going to just play the clip play the slice rather in the original direction. You can also flip it around and play it backwards. You can shuffle it, and that's just going to randomize the order. So every time you hit transform, you'll end up with a different randomized order, as you can see here with this second slice. And we can also do rotation, which if I create another very simple clip here, I think will be a little bit easier to understand. So we'll just make this kind of simple ramp. And I'm going to be operating only on that first slice. So I'm selecting a quarter note here. I only have one option because I've just selected this region. So backwards, obvious. Shuffle, we already understand. Rotate 25, the idea is basically that we're going to shift these to the right, and we'll loop around anything that goes off the end. So the R8 tabla 3 here went off the end of the slice into this clip, or into this kind of position, but it's just going to get looped back around. So that's the idea behind the rotation. So this is a pretty simple device, pretty easy to get a handle on, but I think really powerful as a really quick way to kind of help you through the compositional process as you try to develop bigger pieces of music from the ideas that you already have. Let's move on to the next device, which is called Stages. And this is one that I'm using on this second track where I have one of the presets from the Christian Kleine and Robert Henke pack that recently came out called Operator 20. And let's pair that with some of these same rhythms that we've been using. This particular device, which is here, is really nice for creating bass lines or any kind of staccato type of synth pattern. So I've heard some people that have been using it so far have remarked that it's really nice for kind of hypnotic techno type of stuff. Let's hear this example. So let's actually see it in action. So the idea here basically is that we have stages, and I'm going to start with 4 stages. We have 4 notes, and I'm going to set a different pitch for each of these stages. So far this is pretty much a normal sequencer. And let's hear what we got. Sounds a little bit like a video game. And I'm actually going to go down 1 octave. So the bass note here sets kind of the center, and then we can offset the pitch from that center. And then going back to the stages tab here, so we established the number of stages. These sliders will set the length of each stage. So I can make that first stage longer like this. And I can of course do the same for the others. I can also modulate the velocity over the course of the stage. So I can have a decaying ramp like this. And this particular instrument gives that kind of squelchy, almost filter cutoff type of sound as the velocity goes down. We can also create a rising ramp by just swapping the positions of these 2 numbers. And we can also randomize between the lower bound and the upper bound here. The final tab here allows us to introduce some rests into the pattern for each stage. So in the bottom state, we're just going to generate all of the notes for the kind of duration of the stage based upon the stage length. If I go all the way to the top, so we'll do that for the last one, we'll just completely skip, or not skip, but we'll have rests for the duration of the stage, so we'll have a gap. And anywhere in between, you'll get these different patterns. Now that we have an idea, this is another good opportunity to go to something like Slice Shuffler. So I'll come back over, pick Slice Shuffler. And in this case, I'm going to, so we have 4 stages. One is longer, the other ones are a little bit shorter. And Slice Shuffler can kind of do an interesting job here of switching up sort of the melodic quality of this particular pattern, because we can pick a slice interval that doesn't really line up with the stage lengths that we selected in stages. So if I select, let's just say a half note here, and then we shuffle let's say the back half. Of course, we can also just shuffle the whole thing by just selecting a whole bar and going to shuffle. So we keep the same notes. This is important, right? With the Slice Shuffler, the set of notes that we have is the same. And with the velocity and the note for each, remaining constant, but we're just rearranging them. And in fact, the positions are even constant. So you can see here that the rhythm is not changing in this particular, or it may change, but basically the position of the note within the slice does not change. So when we have one slice for the whole clip, we are actually not changing, I don't believe. Yeah, we're not changing the rhythm at all. We're just changing basically the melody. So super powerful. We'll conclude here by adding one more element with a generator, the third generator in this pack, which is called phase pattern. So this device generates rhythms by allowing you to bend time. So the idea here is that this line kind of represents the speed at which time is flowing within the MIDI clip. And if we just click and drag here, you can see as I do that, that the spacing between the notes changes. And the general rule is that where the line is steeper, the spacing will be wider, and where the line is more shallow, the spacing will be tighter. You can, just like with the Retrigger, you can click and drag here, or you can use these number boxes to set it precisely. And the most obvious thing that you can do here is get kind of a bouncing ball effect by pushing the line into this sort of logarithmic shape. We also have the ability to add a little bit of randomness in here. So if I go back to the default state, this jitter will add some randomness after that function is applied. So if I just add some in here, we're starting from kind of straight eighth notes, but then I go up. You can hear they're not perfectly quantized. They're just deviating a little bit from the grid. And like I said, that's applied after the shape gets applied. So that jitter kind of gets preserved after that shape. You can also change the duration as a function of the note spacing there. And you can also repeat the shape multiple times. So if I increase the number of notes that we have to 32, and then I use this drop down to switch this mode so that we're looking at the iterations parameter, I can repeat this logarithmic shape multiple times over the course of the clip. And one thing I like to use this for a lot is kind of two things. One is it's good for adding sort of an element in the track that's perhaps a little bit more of an atmospheric element that is unquantized. So if I push this back a little bit in the mix, put a little bit of reverb on it, maybe make this clip a bit longer, generate several notes, and then let's do a shape like this. It gives this motion to what's happening where it's having just a little bit of an impact upon the way that the music moves, but it's not interfering rhythmically with, in this case, the rather complex things that are happening in the other two tracks. I often also like to use it, and we can kind of put this element into playing a little bit of a different role, where we actually quantize it. Let's say 16 notes, and then whatever shape that I choose here is kind of just creating all of these different patterns that draw these notes in different ways. So it can be a way to really quickly get yourself going with a rhythm, and it's very quick, right? You just hit the quantize button, and then you mess around here. And of course, the iterations works as well. On the second tab, we can use a similar element here, UI element, to control the pitch. So I can make like a sine shape and then increase the range so that we're getting a sine wave over this range of C3 to E4. And similarly, we can also use this iterations control to loop that sound more times. And it's a little bit easier to see if I just use more notes. So we'll go with 64, but we have to go unquantized because it limits it when we're quantized to whatever the grid is. And then if I use the iterations, you can see that we are repeating that shape multiple times. And when you go really high with that, it can give you some interesting patterns that almost look random because the pattern's kind of folding back on itself. We can do the exact same thing on the velocity side, and I'm just going to set the line to its default state. Pretty crazy. Let's make this longer, 4 bars. So because we set this iterations really high, it ends up actually producing this pattern that loops for a bit and then changes. And it's almost like we have a little bit of a chaotic system going on here. So a pretty unusual but pretty interesting arpeggiator. We can do the exact same thing with velocity. And with this one, I also like to use iterations. On both these pitch and velocity tabs, in this range section, we also have the ability to sort of lock the range. So if I set the low to 80 and the high to 100, and then I link this, what I'm doing is locking this range so that these two move together, and I just shift that whole range up and down, and the same goes for the pitch. So I can kind of scrub through whatever range I want to, which can be pretty useful. And actually, this was a feature that was not in the original version of this device, because this is a device that I had originally made back in March, but was suggested by some of the users in the Ableton beta forum. So thank you to those folks that suggested this really useful feature that is now in this new version. All right, that is it for these devices here. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below. I'm always interested to hear what you think. You can pick up the manual. The link for that is down below as well. I will see you next time. Thanks.